got it on my computer. Call the meeting in order. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I apologize. It's always right there, and I'm like, there's the South Dakota flag. Where is it? Thank you, Carly. Pull up my agenda here. Okay. We did not have anyone signed up to address the board. Awesome. We'll move on. Do you have a motion for approval of the minutes of the April 8th meeting? Oh, we should establish a quorum. We have 3 in person, so that's why I didn't do it.
Okay.
Yeah, that typically we have to do that because we had somebody on phone call, but gotcha. We'll go to it. We have 3 of the 5, so we do have a quorum for our meeting. So we have in person Carly Ryder and Todd Tolkien. Approval of the minutes of the April 8th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. There's no one calling in, so I do not need to take roll call vote. Approval of the agenda for today. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Conflicts of interest, there were none presented to the board. Do I have the approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now on to the reports of the president. We'll start with budget. Rich, thank you.
Good afternoon, President Mickelson, members of the board. In this age of bad haircuts and uncertain time, I was trying to figure out how to present a budget that was going to be meaningful, and part of me said I'd walk up here, introduce the FY21 budget, shrug my shoulders and say thank you and walk out. Kind of reflective of the uncertain times, but fortunately we do not have to act on this budget today. It is merely a presentation to meet our statutory requirements. There are things that we know, there are things that we don't know. There are elements that we are making assumptions on, and there are things that we are hopeful for that are being reflected in this budget. So while the documents, I have a PowerPoint to it and a lot of pages to it, I'm kind of hopeful I can just walk you through in a conversational format. I'll try to look for questions if you have them as we go. But as we start into this year, I think one of the first things I want to start off and talking about is where we ended up last year. In result of FY19, we wound up a little bit better than what we were projecting when we were before you the last time to present the FY20 budget, so that's a good thing. So we start with a little more cash than what we had initially intended to do. That's a positive. Another positive as we head into the FY21 budget is what our current enrollment numbers are trending right now. When you look at the same period last year to where we're at right now, heading into the fall term, student count is up 8.1%, 129 students. Credits are up 1,659, which is 9%. So those are good positive trends. Remiss of me to not talk about the other side of it. We have to wait and see what this fall brings, what our delivery mechanism is going to look like. There's not a lot of barriers to take that off ramp and choose not to come to school. So I think it's really important as we look at our mitigation plans, how we're planning to deliver our services in light of the COVID. I think that's very important, probably as much more important than actual numbers on the page. Other things that we do know, the State Board of Technical Education did not increase the tuition rate any, so that remains the same. So that's $121 per credit going into next year. That's positive for students. One element that they did change was related to the state facility fee. That money is used for the bonding, the construction of our facilities. That fee was increased by $1 per credit. So that increased from $35 a credit to $36 a credit. There's a slight change that they made too. They used to have a program outreach fee. We used to call it technology fee years ago, but it was really to bring technical education into the K-12 systems and provide some of that. They've moved that dedicated $1 per credit out of that program. We're still gonna operate it the same way we always did and slid that dollar over into maintenance and repair. We clearly have more needs in terms of construction and infrastructure projects, so that works for us as well. That's a good thing. So overall, as we stand right now, students would pay $1 a credit more going into this fall. This budget does not ask for any additional fees on the local level. We're gonna try to go forward and hold those where they're at. We are not making any adjustments to program-related fees. That's in the executive summary when we talked about the $10 per credit for a few of the programs and the $50 per credit for the LPN and RN. We're not proposing any changes in that either. So we are leaving that unchanged. So again, it's gonna be $1 a credit more in FY21 than in FY20. Those are knowns right now. Unknowns that we are facing when we look at our revenue stream, same thing you're facing on the K-12 side when it comes with what is that state appropriation bill going to look like? Is it going to be modified? Is it not going to be modified? Those are some unknowns at this point, and that's why we're just presenting the budget. We'll come back with a preliminary adoption in July. If that timeline stays the same, if it doesn't, we're still gonna have to come back with a preliminary that may not look a whole lot different than what you're seeing here, and then do a final adoption in September. You know, hopefully there's not a lot of changes in there. As a former sales tax auditor, I have a keen interest in what's happening with that, recognizing how big of a portion that represents of the state's overall budget. So the next returns are set to come in for April, so that'll really start to show what happens with that. Clearly that has an impact on the state's general fund budget. There's also lots of relief bills out there. So what is at the governor's discretion? I think the allocation for South Dakota is $1.25 billion. As we do some planning with COVID stuff, we were talking about funding mechanism. I said, well, for things that we want to buy, if we get the whole $1.25 billion, we'll be in pretty good shape. But you know, it's going to fall somewhere quite a bit less than that. So we'll just have to wait and see. So there's positives out there. There's other things to be hopeful for in what happens with that. We'll have to address it. This budget, as it's built, leaves us some pivot room. The appropriation bill that was adopted coming out of this legislative session included a 2% adjustment to our per student allocation. This budget that's before you or that's being presented today does not factor that in. So we took a little bit of a conservative approach to that. You hear things through the channels, you kind of hear some of the conversations, you're always reaching out to different folks trying to get a sense of where you think you may wind up, and we just felt it was better to take it out. It's a positive to add it back in. We can always find things to do with the money, much more difficult to begin with a plan in mind and then have to suddenly retract from that. So that's not reflected in the budget. The other thing that came out of the appropriation bill this year was $1.5 million for equipment funding across the 4 technical institutes. We did not factor that in for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't know how the allocation was going to be divided. If it was equally, you know, it's $375,000 a piece. If it's some different allocation, we just didn't know. So we have removed that as well as part of our revenue stream. So again, another conservative approach. Because it's dedicated towards equipment, that's a very easy adjustment to make. I think if you spend any time looking at my brief 47-page summary, you notice that on our capital equipment plan, you're seeing a very similar model to what we did last year. We tend to be kicking things out to the end of that 5-year plan. I don't necessarily want to say that we're kicking the can down the road. I'd like to think we're filling needs as they are. We're not going, things aren't going unmet. but clearly if we had more resources, we would purchase and buy more of the equipment. So we've tried to leverage our federal dollars to use for equipment dollars. We've tried to prioritize in our capital planning to reflect the most immediate needs. So in the FY21 budget, a couple of the immediate needs are the bringing of a dental program online and obviously the vet tech program coming online. So we've built some of our capital equipment requests around those two programs coming. We're leveraging some of our leftover Perkins this year to kind of get a jump start on it for next year. So we feel we've got a pretty reasonable budget built. Some of the more expensive dental equipment we actually put into the construction project. It just fit. It tied in with placing chairs, and they become a fixed structure. So that's saved us from having to buy 6 dental chairs, because that is part of the construction project. So hopefully we've addressed that. Our capital improvements plan, we're trying to follow and strictly adhere, I shouldn't say strictly, but as best we can, to the facility life cycle maintenance plan that Jeff Kreider and the operational services folk put together. We also look at through his fall inspections where we go around and identify components. So we are doing the things that we need to do to maintain our buildings. We're not trying to create a situation that's deferred maintenance down the road that's going to be more problematic. So you'll see a partial parking lot being built this year. That's a continuation of that tech center project that we started last year as a phase 1. We're continuing with phase 2 this year, and we'll continue with phase 3 next year to maintain that piece of our property. So those are kind of on a very high level, some of the bigger dollar components of it. If you, try to put this up there. A little bit hard to see, so I tried to put it in a way that is a little bit more legible, but as we go through the individual categories, talked about tuition and fees. In the rates, there's not a lot of growth there in terms of the per credit. So what you're seeing in terms of actual growth in tuition is really tied to those new programs. So it'll be the new enrollments associated with dental and vet tech. We backed off the corporate ed a little bit, in part just kind of what we were seeing trending so far this year. Clearly, this situation has an impact with the pandemic. So we feel that's a pretty conservative estimate going forward. When you look at the other local revenue, there's ups and downs associated with that. One of the things that this budget is proposing to do is to pull the laptop sales out of the bookstore fund and place them back into the post-secondary fund. All the work associated with it is actually being done by post-secondary fund personnel and not the bookstore. So it just makes sense to align those components back up. So that's a sale of goods and services that would reflect an increase in the local dollars. Some of the local dollars that are going down relate to the capital campaign. We had a big influx last year. It starts to come in over time in these future years, so that's part of the reduction as well. When you look at the state revenues, obviously there's a big number that's declining there, really made up of 2 elements. One is the GO-ED funds that were reflected in last year's budget. That was a one-time distribution tied to our building expansion. Those funds have come in. The second piece of it is the sunsetting of the Board of Regents General Education Agreement. So we received revenue from that to cover our instructional costs. Conversely, we paid the tuition that we collected. So you'll see a corresponding reduction when you get down to the dues and fees on the expenditure side. So that's the major differential when you look at the state money. Federal money is just right now reflecting what we currently receive. It's reflective of our grants for Perkins, for our ABE, for our work study. It is not inclusive of any of the CARES funding that potentially could come out of that act or anything future coming. We'll come back and look at that once we know what our receipts are going to be of that. jumping back to the CARES Act, we're slated to receive $1.7 million for that. The way that legislation is structured, half of those funds have to go as direct aid to students. The other half can be retained by the institution. I was part of a conference call today or a webinar related to that, and I am a little less confident about our ability to use some of those funds than what I was going into that conference. But there's a lot of uncertainty out there, a lot of unknowns. The guidance isn't real clear, but one of the conversations, one of the underlying themes to it is for both students and institutes, it's related to incurred expenses and not need. And expense versus need seems like kind of semantics, but what they're really referring to as expense is what's the out-of-pocket that I had to incur as a student or as an institution as a result of the disruption associated with COVID-19. A need gets classified and gets viewed as a loss of income, creates a need, but it's not an out-of-pocket expense. I think that's a very narrow definition of expense and revenue, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see. We have a year to distribute the funds. We've sent out messaging to our students. We did a survey that they had to meet one of these requirements. What were their needs? What was anticipated? And either to our students' credit or to our discredit in our communication, I think it's the former. I was surprised by the number of applications that were received. It was only 310 out of what potentially could have been 1,500 to 1,600. So I think we were pretty diligent in our communication to students. A lot of repetitiveness, a lot of trying to get that message out to, a lot of trying to encourage them to apply. So students have, I'm going to assume at this point, self-recognize the difference between an expense and a need and are only requesting if they've actually incurred an expense. So we'll start our evaluation process of that and see where that takes us and what we can do with those kinds of funds. So none of those CARE monies, none of those special appropriations on a federal level are reflected in this budget yet. It's basically what did we receive in FY20, what are we going to receive in FY21 related to those same programs. CHB 1182 going up a little bit. Part of that has to do with the dental and the vet tech positions. Those are positions, when you look at market value, are higher than what our salary schedule places them at, so we receive some additional funding associated with that, or should receive some additional funding.
Rich, can I ask, since we're at that number, did we ever receive the funding for the catch-up for the previous fiscal year for the HB?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yes, but there is one piece in FY20 we haven't received. There was some excess funds left, kind of going back
That's
to
what I'm
that.
talking about.
No, that we have not.
And that was actually from the previous fiscal year, correct?
No, that was we did receive some money for HB 1182. That was catch up. We did get an additional amount related to that.
Okay.
That really was to make us as an institute whole.
So we have received that funding.
That bit, but there's also a larger one-time appropriation that was associated with that technology fee that I was talking about.
Okay.
We used to remit that to the state. The state would hold those funds and then make grants out of it. I don't know how many, 6, 7 years ago, it went back to, we started retaining that, but they still had some money in that fund. So we were appropriated a sum of that money, a big percentage of it. We haven't seen that come in yet.
And when is it expected, or when was it expected?
Well, it was expected after the legislature included, it kept, as we inquired, we kept getting a lot of, we're working on a BF&M's going to wait through the legislative process. Clearly that whole concept has changed. Right. Now it's a different situation, a different environment. So we haven't seen it. We'll make an inquiry again and see where it goes. But it's not a huge amount, but it's material. It's
still something.
Yeah, it's $325,000. It'd be nice.
It's an amount.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have it. Yeah. That's a component that comes into play as well, more so for this year, and then we'll report on the preliminary kind of where we think we're going to wind up for FY20. That'll come into play clearly. When I go down the expenditure categories, I think if you looked at the executive summary, what this is really in this budget is calling for is net increase in positions of 6 FTE. And some of this is federally supported. Some of it is already in place because of growing enrollments, because I'm comparing budget to budget. Some of it's related to new program expansion in the dental and vet tech. Obviously, we have to bring in some positions for that. Some of it is related to some departures that are coming up in retirements with Tracy Noldner and some additional staff. So we are utilizing some staff that aren't being replaced are either being filled with adjunct from an instructional side, but also trying to provide additional resources to spread the load that our academic leadership is carrying when you're running those 50 to 60 to 70 different programs and trying to do it with 3 people. So we're trying to provide some additional resources in this budget cycle to fund that. The second piece of it comes to some additional support as Tracy leaves as it relates to HLC. With an accreditation visit coming up with the next couple of years, it's going to take a very dedicated resource and time involved in putting that information together for that accreditation component of it. So there's some resources asking for those kinds of things. There was a consortium related to local K-12 on a Perkins consortium. That's going to be a federally funded position. One of the FTE increases is related to construction management. That position's already in place this year. It's just that it wasn't at the time FY20 budget started, so that's why you see that as an increase. Law enforcement is a position that we're requesting. That's another one of those programs, a lot of different course types of things. We only have one instructor, a lot of growth in enrollment there, so we need to get some additional resources in that area as well. So it's a net increase of 6. Some of the dollars, as you look at it compared, 6 positions cost us more than $287,000, especially at some of the levels where some of these will be. But you have to remember when we built the budget last year in FY20, we had built it with, if we achieve some revenue targets, maybe we would be able to do some one-time distributions. Maybe they could become permanent. Some of that stuff is kind of set on the back burner now as we head into this next cycle is what's going to happen with our enrollment. So that's why you're not seeing a big part of that differential in there. So we're using some of that budget to budget difference is why it's not as big as what the impact would otherwise be. Instructor, hourly, adjunct, you're seeing some of that as it relates to our nursing program, some instructor hourly. We're also seeing some of those full-time positions that we're not replacing that we're using adjunct. A little bit of growth related to that. My projections for it are kind of backwards looking. We look at what do we have incurred so far, how is that going to project out into next year? So that's reflective of that component. A big reduction in the early retirement. We've talked about this a couple different times. That was just the change in the way that early retirement incentive was funded. It used to be a distribution over 5 years. It was a lump sum at the end of FY20. We had added an additional $500,000 in for that. I can report it's not going to be that much. It's going to be a little bit less than that. Not a lot, but it all adds up and it all weighs. So we're kind of estimating roughly about $370,000 being that impact of that early retirement for that one-time payout. You see an adjustment in the professional services. This kind of goes back to some of the FTE. We had 2 positions that were funded through hospital contracts. They weren't our employees. They were actually employees of Sanford Health that taught in a couple of our programs. Those folks have retired and moved on. So we are going to bring back those positions as our FTE on our salary schedule. So that's part of the growth in the FTE as well. But there's an offsetting reduction in those professional services. Now, when I say 2 people, you see a $433,000 reduction. The first question is, how much are you paying for that? And there's other elements to the professional services, and it's really related to the architect fees associated with the building project. A lot of that was front-loaded in FY20, where the bulk of those $250,000 fees are. There is nothing in FY21 for that when it comes to A&E, because most of that work's been done. So we're not going to have any additional cost to it. So you're going to see that reduction as it relates to that category. Next big item that comes down into play is supplies and material. And I talked a little bit about that on the revenue side of it. That's those laptops. We are buying those for resale, and we are bringing them into the fold of the post-secondary fund. So you'll see an uptick in laptop purchases, but overall, if you were to pull the laptops out of there, supplies and materials would be down a little bit, and a lot of that's in the non-capitalized equipment area. Next big adjustment, looking at individual line items, relates to the dues and fees, and again, that's the other side of that Board of Regents Gen Ed agreement. That is entirely related to the tuition and fees that we would forward on to them that we no longer have to do. We're in some discussions right now on what that arrangement looks like in teaching transferable courses, how we're trying to work out the dollar amount to it, how we're trying to do that. We will eventually get there. Probably if we do have to have any type of exchange of dollars, we may come back and add some type of course fee related to it rather than the institute trying to cover those costs. But we'll continue to have those discussions with the Board of Regents, in particular USD, and how we're moving forward with that. The other kind of an increase related to some of the changes were in the bad debt. We're gonna, since we're pulling the laptops over into the post-secondary fund, we're gonna pull some of the bad debt budget that we put in there with that. So we'll have to carry that over into it. I am hopeful that number is high. We're seeing it trend downward. I think part of that has to do with the ORC, and I would have felt more strongly about that prior to March 13th. I feel a little less strongly about that post March 13th, but that should give us enough room to anticipate any bad debt occurrences that we would have. Building improvements I've really talked about already. It's really a continuation of the projects that we approved last year. Eventually I'll come back with a carryover and a supplemental appropriation. We'll just wait and see how much of the projects are going to be incurred in this year, and then I'll come back. Obviously, when you look at FY20, there's going to be a big difference in that revenue and expenditures because we haven't expended that money for those projects, but we're going to want to take that positive variance and roll that into FY21. So we'll see that coming forward. Land improvements, that reduction there, it's a net reduction. It's reflective of the continuation of the parking lot, but it's also a reduction of the Terry Avenue extension not being in this budget. In all likelihood, we're not even going to incur an expense in that until FY21, so that'll be another thing that I carry forward. But I tend to approach and place items in a budget in the year in which we're going to start the project, and then if we need to move the funds into the next year, we'll go ahead and do that through a carryover. The fund balance, as I stated, we started the year a little bit better than what we had planned. I, at a very high level, haven't sat down and done a lot of pen to paper yet, but I'm feeling that we should be in a fairly good position going into FY21. Our summer enrollment is down a little bit, but not materially down. As I told Bob, I said it's all in how you look at the numbers. Dual credits up 96.4%. That sounds awesome, except it went from 28 to 55 credits. So the percentage-wise, it looks great. Raw numbers, not so great. But overall, our summer credits last year, as of the billing date, were 4,800. This year, they're 4,300. That's a 10% reduction. And I think a lot of that is really related to the delivery model. We are completely online this summer, and I think if that's a forbearance of what we could possibly see, that's why it's so important that we are able to continue our face-to-face instruction and our hands-on instruction to make sure we continue to be able to operate in an environment. I think that minimizes our impact on our enrollment. We have to switch into an online that's a little bit tougher to deliver some of those course aspects in an online setting. So feeling pretty good about that aspect, at least in what we know today. There's still a lot of unknowns out there. There's still some funding pieces and mechanisms that need to come together. I think one of the observations that I've heard made that if that special session doesn't happen in June, obviously the longer it goes, the less time it gives us to react. You know, can you correlate that to less likelihood that it's going to be significant changes? I think that's a fair observation to make. So if delaying is a good thing, that might be a good thing that comes out of it as it relates to those appropriated dollars. So we'll just have to wait to see. We continue to reach out through the Board of Technical Education, through the executive director, through contacts in the governor's office, wherever we can. You're trying to get as much information as somebody has, and I'm sure they're operating in a very similar environment that we are. We're waiting to see what happens. So that's a very high level, but I think it encapsulates the major changes in what's happening in the post-secondary fund. Questions related to that?
So I'm curious, in this budget, in the hopes that we're back in person in the fall,
Yeah.
any increases for PPE, sanitizer, other for protection services for staff and students?
Right, and that's probably my assignment tomorrow, is to start buying some of those kinds of things. We're doing some projects in the bookstore. He has some rebate dollars that allows us to restructure that whole delivery mechanism that provides some safety for those frontline personnel, also provides for better traffic flow. We're going to try to use some of those rebate dollars to address some of our frontline folks as well. Is there a way that we can continue to provide a safer environment, either through the social distancing and the floor mats and all of the types of markers, also the face shields and sneeze guards, or whatever you want to call them. So we're starting to look at those various components. We've had discussions about making sure that students are encouraged and operating on that spectrum somewhere of encouraging, strongly recommending, requiring face masks, especially in a situation where we can't social distance to the extent that you would like to. So we want to make sure we provide those, that we have those available. So we're starting that process now. Bookstore manager's done a good job at building connections with supply lines for that. I have some connections with some Concordance Health as well, so we're trying to be aware of what those timelines are so that we are prepared and ready to go. So
please work with like Missy Brock at our
Right.
office as well.
Yep.
Supply as well. And in regards to that too, I have questions like, so I know Dakota Promise scholarships were just awarded. What happens if a student then doesn't come on campus? Are we able to re-award that to a student who is on campus? You know, I was wondering how that all would occur with the funding.
yeah, usually they have a window in which they want those awards to be made. We tend to push it right up to the threshold of that award amount. So we're not leaving money on the table when we go to do our awards. We're taking it right up to there. And we've had these adjustments before where, okay, a student doesn't show up, or even the ones that don't continue. Obviously, you've built budget and set that aside. So you either look to re-award in a future year, or you go back and say, hey, can we add some students in the spring term? The Build Dakota board has been very, from my perspective, flexible and trying to work with us, trying to get those dollars into students' hands. So, but that's a very good point. Hopefully students recognize the incredible value that scholarship brings to it and takes advantage of that, but I also understand the other considerations. So I think everybody's hoping for the best and understanding that we may have to be flexible once we get there and we start to see something different.
Other questions? I just think, you know, with unemployment in age group of 16 to 21 right now. I think I saw nationally is at 32%, which is like an all-time high. It just gives us an opportunity as an institution to help of that age group especially. So I'm hopeful that, you know, as adaptable as you guys have been, that people see the value that Southeast Tech can provide to their education. And you've been so adaptable with going on remote and so forth, and just keeping that communication open with current students and future students. Because I think as a parent of some college students, there's been two distinct different approaches between my two sons, two different colleges. And let me tell you, I'm much happier with one that's been over communicating than the one that hasn't been. And so if Southeast Tech can continue doing that, I know they do a great job, but I think that will really help set you all apart.
Yeah, and I think there's some other programs that are in the works. Benjamin and Bob can speak to it better than I can. It's kind of a quid pro quo. When I talk about budget stuff, they kind of don't listen, and so I'm returning the favor when they start talking about academic stuff. But there are other things out of there. Clearly, unemployment is a consideration, and we have seen that in the past. In 2008, with that recession, there was a little bit of a lag effect to it in terms of when we started to see our enrollments climb, and it usually came a couple of years after that, and FY10 was really when we had. So it was a 12 to 18 month lag. So if these unemployment numbers hold, it certainly could have a positive impact on our enrollment downstream as we get out there, especially if we get a vaccine in place or therapeutics that are effective and people feel safe going back into those environments. I think that'll be a very good thing. I think those other programs are really looking at certificate-based, quick trainings, get people back into the workforce, which we're positioned to start working on and trying to do. So.
Do you know, and this is kind of off your subject, so maybe that you might know, I know the State Department of Ed is working on a document to safe to go back to school document for the state of South Dakota. Is the tech board working on something similar, or?
I'm not aware of anything. What we're really looking to follow obviously you're reaching out to every potential resource. And I think part of what you do is you tend to normalize, okay, I'm hearing the same thing in multiple places. That seems like it's a good idea. Or, well, this is something nobody thought about before. Yeah, that seems to fit our environment. So one of the sources that we're looking at is going back to the city of Sioux Falls and their SOAR program and what they're doing in businesses reopening. Clearly, we're going to be looking at CDC guidelines, looking at as the primary authoritative source, the State Department of Health. And then, of course, we have local partnerships. We have heavy engagement with both of our major healthcare providers here in town. So we have good partnerships with both of them. We have a COVID-19 kind of reopening task force that's meeting on a regular basis, throwing ideas out there, everything on the wall. What do we need to do? Where do we need to prioritize? So that's both internal and external stakeholders representing that. And some of those pieces that are going to start coming together. We had a discussion earlier today about, well, how many of these things do you think we should order? How many of this should we look at getting? What do we need to do to have this type of stuff in place? So those pieces are, all the balls are in the air, but they are all starting to fall into place. Another point, we're working with K-12. Bob Ray is part of our COVID-19 task force, so he's helping build that link between what's being done on the K-12 side and what we're doing on our side as well. So I think everybody's putting forth the...
Sorry,
Yeah, it's okay.
Action, even from 10 feet away.
There's always has to be one, right? But I think we're all focused on that. I think we clearly have a hypersensitivity and a laser focus to that. We recognize and we understand that we are going to need, to your point earlier, invest in PPE and different mitigation and remediation strategies and resources to do that. As I kind of made a comment, $100,000 expenditure seems like a lot of money, but what we're doing is we're trying to protect that $11 million revenue stream just in student tuition and fees. not to mention the personal disruption that it causes to the individual. It's bigger than us and our dollars. It's about what does it do to those individuals and what does it do to the business community. So, clearly that's front of mind, clearly something that we are keenly aware of. It's nice to have a large number of your staff that are in the healthcare field to be sounding boards. It's nice that I'm largely ignored in terms of dollars and expenditures, but that's okay. I recognize the importance of it, and that's my job to make sure that at the end of the day we're still fiscally sound and viable as well. So I think we're doing that, and I think we're moving in the right direction. So we'll start seeing a lot of things happening. There's communications going out about a phased reopening to campus, bringing more staff back. When are we going to open it up to the public and that engagement? When are we going to be fully open when students coming back? So we've talked about some different strategies related to that as well. How open do we really make our campus? I think our primary focus is to serve our community, and by community I mean our students first and our staff, and ensuring that they can achieve their educational attainment in a safe environment. So we're really focusing around that. So kind of got off topic. It's rare that I pontificate, but just do a little bit of that. We got a couple other funds. I'll just briefly speak to them. We have 3 enterprise funds. The main difference on the bookstore fund is the removal of those laptops. So that's why you see a reduction in sales. That's why you see a reduction on the expenditure side of it. The infrastructure changes that we're making in the bookstore obviously are being funded with rebate dollars, so there's not a lot of pocket cost to us related to that. So we think long term it has some benefits, not only in the short term, but in our delivery of services. I think the other 2 funds, the ones that the child care and the food service, are going to present more of a challenge for us. They're small funds, but they have a material impact. I think in the food service, since that's a reporting line to me, we were doing really well this year. We were making some changes with the staff we had in there and the way that we were delivering product and turnover, and we're going to be able to do it next year. So it's going to have a negative impact probably on those sales. We tried to have a lot of hot case food ready, grab and go type of things. Students don't have a lot of time. You won't be able to do that in this coming year. So it's probably going to have an impact. I think as we look at this FY20, the subsidy amounts that are there for both of those should be sufficient. We shouldn't have to increase it in FY20. We were through the majority of the year, so we should be okay. FY21, I think we're just going to have to wait until we get there and see how that trends. Budget's built on the same level of support from the post-secondary fund. We're not increasing that. Child care is probably potentially less impacted. Food service is going to definitely be impacted. So my folks are working on that right now, coming up with some different ideas of what we can do to try to get product out there for the students. Questions or other comments that I can be more than happy to try to answer? Again, it doesn't require an action. It's just an acknowledgement that the budget's been presented to you, and then we'll, like I said, we have to do a preliminary adoption in July to meet statutory requirements. So when that happens in July, unfortunately, the first Wednesday is July 1st. So depending upon when that legislative body schedules, if they meet on the 28th of June, we may have to back that up because I may not be able to incorporate those things into the budget, but we'll get there. So.
In our July, I believe we're moving it to the 8th. Yeah.
Right. So that still may not be enough time.
I know.
So
it might not be the right time, but just for public, if anybody's watching or listening, just so they are aware too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I would just ask, and if you need my assistance as well, I would love to be reaching out to Nick and Dana through them to reach out to BFM to see when we can get those funds.
Yeah, Scott and Nick still answer the phone, so I must not be too much of an annoyance yet.
Okay, good.
So we haven't had to go out to the bigger guns to get some answers. They've been very helpful and very supportive, and we publicly acknowledge that support that we receive from those groups. So,
Yeah, especially since we get under on the HB 11A2, we need these funds, so.
exactly. Thank you.
Thanks. Acknowledge that report. Move on then. Okay. We don't have to have board action on that since it's just an acknowledgement. So you have both reports next, don't you, Benjamin? Awesome.
Good afternoon, President Mickelson, members of the board. I wanted to bring you up to date on two initiatives that we're currently working on Southeast Tech. Both do require actions on part of the board. The first one is the Federal Perkins Grant Consortium. We want to enter an agreement with the South Dakota Department of Education, where we will become the custodial agent for 17 high schools for their Perkins funds here in eastern South Dakota. Our counterpart, Western Dakota, out on the West River, will be doing that similar thing for high schools on their area. The 17 schools that we're working with and the funds that we'll be managing will be about $100,000 each year. That's an average amount right now. And we'll be working with the schools to go ahead and allocate those funds to purchasing equipment under the Perkins guidelines and manage it for the consortium so that the school districts can now share equipment and resources within that Perkins funds versus it being very minimal and for their district only. So we would like to move forward with that. The nice part is we are also receiving a grant to fund a consortium director. So that person would be full-time as part of the staff at Southeast Tech. That funding is coming from the Department of Education to cover both salary and benefits for that position. So it would be a very nice addition to staff to help increase services for the districts that we're serving.
Do you have a motion on approval of the Perkins Consortium?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second?
Any discussion?
Is the grant for the director, is that just a one-year grant, or how long is that grant good for?
It's, as long as we are in the consortium, we would receive those funds to cover
Wonderful.
that position.
From the Department of Ed.
Correct.
I just think anytime we, the state and our communities can leverage funding to make a bigger impact, it's a great project. I know we won't be a part of it because we are large enough that we can have our own Perkins programs, but it's great for our surrounding communities to be able to take advantage of this Southeast Tech, and hopefully we'll get some more kids interested from those communities to come on.
Oh, so far it's been very positive on that front.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Seeing no more questions, I'll take a vote. All those in favor of approving the Southeast Tech to enter the consortium agreement with the South Dakota Board of Education signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Same sign. No opposes. It carries 4-0. Board Member Baker has joined since our last vote. So if anybody's watching, I don't know if they can see with the camera angle since we're spread apart here. So thank you. Next report, Ben.
The other thing I'd like to bring forth before the board is something really exciting, and that is the launching of a new Associate of Applied Science degree at Southeast Tech. We would like the board's permission to move forward with an Associate of Applied Science in Paramedic Science. This degree program came about a year ago. The University of South Dakota has a 4-year baccalaureate degree in paramedic science. They've had a hard time, and it's one of just a literally handful of baccalaureate programs. As they were going through their ProMatic accreditation with Sanford Health as their partner, the ProMatic accreditor said, you know, one of your challenges is the fact that it is a 4-year, and they were seeing that a lot of students were not staying in the program to complete the 4 years. They'd complete the first 2 years, get the paramedic license, and then withdraw from the program. So we were approached by both Sanford Health and USD to overtake their paramedic program and convert it to an associate's level program. The program that we are going to be starting and launching, again, it's currently active, so it is already ProMatically accredited under the KHAB accreditation process and grouping of programs, which all of our health programs are accredited under. So we'd be able to transfer that accreditation ProMatically to Southeast Tech. The program would allow us to go ahead and partner with Sanford Health, and we would actually we wouldn't require any infrastructure or addition of staff on our part. we're going to enter in a memorandum of understanding with Sanford Health where we're going to utilize their facility, and a lot of their resources and their staff to teach the ProMatic courses. Students would then come to campus and be on campus for their general education courses. So it's a really good partnership with Sanford Health, and moving forward to really provide an opportunity for students that's greatly needed. The program has also required us to add an additional course. The course is an EMT course. We're going to be adding it starting this fall as a 3-credit course. The reason we've had to add the EMT course is that under the guidelines of accreditation, students have to be a licensed EMT to enter the paramedic program. So we're going to start that early and start that going there. The EMT course, with that being added, we're also opening that up and we're classifying that as a general education science course. And a lot of our programs, such as a lot of our trade programs, law enforcement, early childhood, are going to start offering that as a science course. So students could take the EMT and eventually become licensed EMTs if they choose, but then they have that knowledge as a science-based course moving forward within their program. We just see so many pluses, so many positives coming out from this. We're also going to be working with a lot of our health programs. They require currently the CNA, the Certified Nursing Aide, but a lot of what they do, like within our sonography programs, the CNA is really not applicable. So they're going to transfer and actually allow the EMT to be substituted there. So students there again can take either one, and then if they get licensed, can work while they're going to school to complete their baccalaureate or their associate's program at Southeast Tech and some of these other health programs. The EMT program again, or I'm sorry, the paramedic program is going to be a full 2-year program consisting of 60 credits. 15 of them will be general education. The other 45 will be ProMatic courses, base courses within the paramedic science field. We are anticipating, based upon the need and a lot of what we're seeing out there, that it's going to be a very popular program. The EMT course is really gaining a tremendous amount of momentum, so we're hoping that we can continue that into the paramedic. We've asked that this be maintained in this associate level program because of the general education components. They really want to make sure that these graduates have the ability to take on leadership and management positions as they work in field, presenting to boards, trying to prepare budgets and work up for equipment and things like that. So they really want them to have these other additional essential skills as part of the program. So we're doing it as a full year or a 2-year associates program. Questions?
So will USD, say I come to Southeast Tech to get the 2-year, are they open then to accepting most of those credits if somebody wants to go on to get their BA or what?
Yes.
Is there some agreement that we'll be working with that?
We'll be amending and working on the Bachelor's of Science and Technical Studies, that they'll be able to go that track. One thing that USD has seen and Sanford Health has seen is that a lot of students who want to get into some of the pre-med programs, especially for physician assistants, become paramedics first, earn that degree, and then later, as they're working in field, go through PA school. So we're seeing a lot of cross there.
Great, that's super.
Yeah, I think it's great that the EMT class will be offered as well. I think about who we attract students from, and a lot of those are smaller towns where people are volunteer firefighters and have other needs for having those types of skills in their communities. So I think that's a huge win for more than just, you know, students coming to Southeast, but really going back to those communities and taking a skill with them, hopefully the whole paramedic skills. But if nothing else, at least we have that opportunity for them to have that EMT too. So very good.
Do you have a motion to approve the Southeast Tech to establish a new degree program of the Associate of Applied Science and Paramedic Science?
So moved.
Second.
A motion second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anything else for the good of the board? Bob, do you have anything else to add? Thank you. So we meet again June 3rd. Just we had a late May meeting because we thought we might have another budget meeting from the state legislature that we didn't. So that's why the late meeting so late in May, and then we'll turn around June 3rd, still have our June board meeting for Southeast Tech. So, thank you. Do you have a motion for adjournment?
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you.